The torrential downpour outside was nothing compared to the storm raging inside the Sterling mansion. One moment, Isabella Sterling was cradling her stomach, dreaming of the nursery she'd designed. The next, she was staring at a set of glossy photographs her husband Nathaniel had just thrown on the marble coffee table. They showed her in a seemingly compromising position with a man she'd never met. It was a lie, a cruel, impossible lie, and yet the venom in her mother-in-law's eyes and the chilling emptiness in her husband's confirmed her fate. Before she could even process the betrayal, the heavy oak doors of the life she knew were slammed shut behind her, leaving her pregnant, penniless, and alone in the unforgiving night. But they made one fatal mistake. They forgot about the one man more powerful than all of them, her billionaire father-in-law, Richard Sterling. And he was about to find out everything. The air in the grand drawing room of the Sterling estate in Greenwich, Connecticut, was thick with the scent of lilies and betrayal. The lilies, funereal and white, were Genevieve Sterling's favorite. The betrayal was a new addition to the decor. Isabella Rossi Sterling stood on the Aubusson carpet, the plush wool a cruel mockery of comfort beneath her trembling feet. The silk of her maternity blouse, once a soft caress, now felt like a shroud. Her hand instinctively went to the gentle curve of her belly, a silent promise to the tiny life within, that she would protect them, even as her own world was being systematically demolished. Across from her, her husband of 2 years, Nathaniel Sterling, wouldn't meet her gaze. His handsome face, usually so quick to smile, was a mask of strained indifference. His attention was fixed on the damning photographs scattered across the polished surface of a Louis XV coffee table. They were expertly crafted forgeries, showing Isabella in an intimate cafe setting with a man whose face was artfully obscured, his hand resting on hers. A private moment that never happened. A lie spun from pixels and malice. The architect of this destruction, Genevieve Sterling, stood beside her son, a vision in Chanel tweed and icy condescension. Her silver hair was coiffed into a perfect helmet, unyielding and severe, much like the woman herself. Her eyes the same cold grey as a winter sky raked over Isabella with undisguised contempt. "I knew it from the start." Genevieve began, her voice a low, cultured hiss that cut deeper than any shout. "I told you, Nathaniel. Blood will always out. You can't turn a little museum curator from Brooklyn into a Sterling. She has no breeding, no integrity." "Genevieve, please," Isabella whispered, her voice cracking. "Nathaniel, look at me. You know me. This isn't real. Someone did this to us." Nathaniel finally lifted his head. The conflict in his eyes was agonizing to watch. He was a man caught between the woman he professed to love and the mother whose approval he had craved his entire life. But weakness, Isabella was learning, was a far more corrosive acid than outright evil. "They are dated, Bella," he said, his voice hollow. "From last month, while I was in Singapore. My mother's investigator has phone records too. A man named... It doesn't matter. How could you? There is no man." Isabella's voice rose, laced with a desperation that only seemed to confirm her guilt in their eyes. "I was at the Met planning the new exhibit. I was attending prenatal appointments. I was here waiting for you. This is a lie." Genevieve let out a delicate, theatrical scoff. "Oh, the drama! And to think you're carrying a child. Are you even certain it's Nathaniel's, or does it belong to your accomplice?" The accusation struck Isabella with the force of a physical blow, knocking the air from her lungs. She looked at Nathaniel, pleading with her eyes for him to defend her, to defend their child. He just shook his head, a gesture of pathetic surrender. In that moment, the love she thought they shared evaporated, leaving behind a cold, hard stone of realization in her gut. He was not her partner. He was his mother's son. "I want her out of my house," Genevieve declared, turning to Nathaniel as if Isabella were no longer in the room. "Now, with nothing but the clothes on her back. We will have our lawyers draft a quiet annulment, citing irreconcilable differences. We'll be generous, of course, provided she signs a non-disclosure agreement and disappears." "Wait," Isabella stammered, her mind racing. "My things? My purse, my phone?" Genevieve smiled, a tight, cruel stretching of her lips. "Your privileges have been revoked. The Sterling legal team will handle the disposition of your effects. You will be escorted from the premises." She pressed a small, discreet button on the wall. Within seconds, 2 burly security guards in dark suits entered the room, their faces impassive. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through Isabella's shock. "Nathaniel, don't let her do this. This is our home. This is our baby." He flinched at the word, baby. The only flicker of humanity he'd shown. But it was fleeting. He looked away toward the rain-lashed windows. "It's for the best, Bella. My mother. She knows what's right for the family." "The family?" Isabella's voice dripped with a sudden icy calm. The desperation was gone, replaced by a clarity born of absolute betrayal. "Or the Sterling brand, the Sterling fortune." The guards flanking her now gently took her arms. The touch was professional, but it felt like a violation. She didn't resist. She walked with a dignity she didn't know she possessed, her head held high. As they passed Nathaniel, she stopped and looked directly at him, forcing him to meet her gaze one last time. "I will never forget this, Nathaniel," she said, her voice low and steady. "And one day you will have to explain to your child why you let your mother throw their pregnant mother out into a storm based on a lie." He had no response. He just stood there, a hollow man in a gilded cage. The heavy front doors swung open, revealing a night ripped apart by wind and rain. The manicured lawns of the estate were shrouded in a churning darkness. One of the guards held an umbrella, a perfunctory gesture of courtesy that was almost insulting. He walked her down the sweeping stone steps to the edge of the long, winding driveway. "A car will be here in 5 minutes to take you to a hotel for the night," he said gruffly, clearly uncomfortable. Isabella shook her head. She knew what that meant. A hotel chosen by Genevieve. A gilded prison where she would be watched, managed, and forced to sign away her life. "No, thank you," she said, her voice surprisingly firm. "I'll find my own way." Before the guard could protest, she turned and started walking. The rain immediately plastered her silk blouse to her skin, the cold seeping into her bones. The wind tore at her hair, whipping it across her face. Each step down the long private road, away from the mocking lights of the mansion, was an act of sheer will. She had no phone, no wallet, no plan. All she had was the fierce, primal instinct to protect the life growing inside her, and a burning, righteous anger that was quickly becoming the only thing keeping her warm. The gates of the Sterling estate loomed ahead, a black iron portcullis marking the border between a life of luxurious lies and a future of terrifying unknown truth. And as she passed through them, a sob finally escaped her lips, lost in the howling of the wind. She was free, but she had never felt more alone. The walk from the Sterling estate to the main road felt like a pilgrimage through purgatory. Each squelch of her soaked designer flats on the asphalt was a reminder of the life she had just lost. The manicured hedges and ancient oak trees that lined the private drive, once symbols of sanctuary and permanence, now seemed like silent, judgmental sentinels. By the time Isabella reached the main road, she was drenched, shivering, and utterly disoriented. The passing headlights of cars cut through the deluge, illuminating her for a brief, startling moment, a ghost of a woman in a ruined silk blouse standing on the edge of nowhere. For a terrifying hour, she walked her mind a maelstrom of shock and grief. The initial adrenaline had worn off, leaving a bone-deep chill that had nothing to do with the rain. How could Nathaniel believe it? How could the man who had whispered promises of forever in her ear just last week now look at her with such cold suspicion? And Genevieve. Isabella had always known her mother-in-law was difficult, that she saw Isabella as an inadequate addition to her perfect dynasty. But she had never imagined this level of calculated cruelty. To fabricate evidence to poison her own son's mind, to cast out his pregnant wife without a shred of compassion. It was monstrous. Her feet were raw, her body ached, but one thought propelled her forward. Chloe. Chloe Davis was her opposite in almost every way. Where Isabella was thoughtful and measured, Chloe was a firecracker of righteous indignation and fierce loyalty. A tenacious journalist for an online investigative news outlet, Chloe lived in a cramped but vibrant fourth-floor walk-up in Astoria, Queens, a universe away from the sterile opulence of Greenwich. They had been friends since their scholarship days at Columbia, a bond forged over late-night study sessions and cheap pizza. Hitching a ride was out of the question. Flagging down a taxi without a penny to her name was impossible. Her only hope was the train station a few miles away. She remembered seeing it once on a drive with Nathaniel. She focused on the memory, using it as a beacon. When she finally stumbled onto the platform, she must have looked like a wraith. A sympathetic station agent, a kind-faced woman named Martha, saw her shivering form and took pity on her. "Honey, are you all right? You look like you've been through a war." Isabella, her teeth chattering, could barely form the words. I was robbed. They took everything. My purse, my phone. I just need to get to Astoria." It wasn't a complete lie. She had been robbed, just not in the way the woman imagined. Martha's expression softened. She looked at Isabella's belly, then back at her pale, rain-streaked face. Without a word, she slid a ticket through the window. "On the house," she said quietly. "You go get yourself somewhere warm and safe." The simple act of kindness was so overwhelming that Isabella burst into tears, mumbling her thanks, before hurrying onto the waiting train. The warmth of the carriage was a blessing. She huddled in a corner seat, wrapping her arms around herself, trying to become invisible as the train rattled its way toward the city. It was past midnight when she finally stood outside Chloe's apartment building. She pressed the buzzer for 4B, praying her friend was home. A moment later, a crackly voice answered. "Yeah, who is it?" "Chloe, it's me. It's Isabella." The silence on the other end was heavy with confusion. "Bella, what's wrong? You sound awful. Can you just let me in? Please." The lock buzzed immediately. Isabella pushed the heavy door open and began the slow, arduous climb up 4 flights of stairs. Each step was a monumental effort. When she reached the landing, Chloe's door was already open. Her friend stood there in faded sweatpants and an old t-shirt. Her usually sharp features clouded with worry. The sight of Chloe's familiar, concerned face was the final crack in Isabella's crumbling composure. A choked sob escaped her, and she practically fell into her friend's arms. "Whoa, Bella. Hey, you're okay. I've got at you," Chloe murmured, guiding her inside and shutting the door against the world. She led Isabella to the worn, comfortable sofa, wrapped her in a thick fleece blanket, and immediately put a kettle on the stove. "Talk to me," Chloe said, her journalist's instincts kicking in, but tempered with deep affection. "What the hell happened? Where's Nathaniel?" "You're soaking wet and freezing." Between shivering fits and ragged breaths, Isabella told her everything. The setup, the faked photographs, Genevieve's venomous accusations, Nathaniel's spineless betrayal, being thrown out into the storm with nothing. Chloe listened, her expression hardening from concern to disbelief, and then to pure, unadulterated rage. "That absolute witch!" Chloe seethed, pacing the small living rooms like a caged tigress. "And Nathaniel, that gutless, silver-spooned coward. I swear to God. Bella, I will end them. I will write an exposé that will strip the paint from their multi-million-dollar walls." "It's not about revenge right now, Chloe," Isabella whispered, sipping the hot tea Chloe had pressed into her hands. The warmth was slowly chasing the chill from her body. "I don't know what to do. I have nothing. They control everything. The accounts were all joint, but I never had direct access. They'll paint me as an unhinged, cheating gold digger." Chloe stopped pacing and knelt in front of Isabella, her eyes blazing with determination. "No, we're not going to let that happen. First things first, you are safe here. This is your home now, for as long as you need it. Tomorrow we get you to a doctor to make sure you and the baby are okay. Then we start fighting back." She took Isabella's hands. "You are not the timid little mouse Genevieve thinks you are. You are one of the smartest women I know. You're strong, and you're a mother now. They didn't just kick you out, Bella. They declared war on your child, and they have no idea who they're messing with." For the first time all night, a tiny flicker of hope ignited within Isabella. Huddled in Chloe's tiny, cluttered, book-filled apartment, wrapped in a second-hand blanket, she felt more secure than she ever had in the cold, cavernous rooms of the Sterling mansion. The gilded cage had shattered, but here in this haven built on genuine friendship, she could start to gather the pieces. The fight wouldn't be easy, but she wouldn't be fighting it alone. And she was fighting for more than just herself now. She was fighting for the small, innocent life that depended entirely on her. The storm outside was beginning to subside. The storm inside Isabella, however, was just starting to gather its strength. Thousands of miles away, in the penthouse suite of the Park Hyatt Tokyo, Richard Sterling closed a deal worth 9 figures with a brisk handshake and a half smile that didn't reach his eyes. At 65, Richard was a titan of industry, the architect of the Sterling global logistics empire. He was a man of cold logic, ruthless efficiency, and immense understated power. He moved through the world with the quiet confidence of a man who owned most of it. His personal life was something he'd largely outsourced to his wife, Genevieve. He provided the vast resources, and she curated their social standing, managed the households, and raised their son. He trusted her judgment in these matters implicitly, not out of deep emotional connection, but out of a CEO's faith in a long-serving, reliable department head. He'd met Isabella a handful of times. She was pretty quiet and seemed to make Nathaniel happy. Richard didn't deal in happiness. He dealt in assets and liabilities. Isabella seemed like a neutral asset. She didn't come from money or influence, which was a minor liability in Genevieve's eyes, but she was educated and discreet, which Richard appreciated. He had bigger things to worry about than his son's domestic arrangements. The call from Genevieve came as he was overlooking the glittering expanse of Tokyo. Her voice was strained, crafted to sound mournful. "Richard, something dreadful has happened," she said. "It's Isabella." He listened without interruption as she spun her carefully edited tale. Isabella had been unfaithful. There was irrefutable proof. A terrible, sordid affair. Nathaniel was devastated, of course. For the good of the family, to avoid a scandal, they had to act quickly. Isabella had been sent away with a generous settlement offer, pending to handle things quietly. Richard felt a stab of annoyance. Not at Isabella's supposed infidelity. He was too pragmatic to be shocked by such things, but at the messiness of it all. "Did you handle it cleanly?" He asked, his tone all business. "No chance of this hitting the press." "Of course, darling," Genevieve assured him. "I have it all under control. I'm focusing on helping Nathaniel through this difficult time." "Good," Richard said, already dismissing it. "I'll be back in 2 days. Keep it quiet." He hung up and turned his attention back to his quarterly reports. The matter, as far as he was concerned, was closed. But 24 hours later, another message arrived. It wasn't a call or an official email. It was an encrypted text message to his private unlisted phone, a number known to only 5 people in the world. The sender was anonymous. The message was short and chillingly direct. "They lied. She is pregnant with your grandchild. They threw her out in a storm with nothing. Ask your head of household staff, Mrs. Davies." She saw everything. Richard Sterling stared at the message, his blood running cold. Pregnant. The word seemed to hang in the air, changing the entire equation. An affair was a messy inconvenience. A pregnant daughter-in-law cast out into the street was a different matter entirely. It was a matter of legacy. Of blood. He dismissed the possibility of a prank. No one had this number. This was a calculated move. And it had worked. A seed of doubt, hard and sharp, was planted in his mind. He trusted Genevieve's management of their social lives, but he had never mistaken her for a sentimentalist. Her ambition for the Sterling name was a cold, hard thing. Was it cold enough to do this? His next call was not to Genevieve or Nathaniel. It was to Alistair Finch, the head of his personal security detail for 30 years. Finch was a former MI6 agent, a man of absolute discretion and formidable capability. "Alistair," Richard said, his voice low and devoid of emotion, "I have a delicate and urgent matter. I need you to conduct a quiet investigation at the Greenwich estate. I want you to speak with the head housekeeper, Eleanor Davies. Discreetly. I want to know the exact circumstances under which my daughter-in-law Isabella left the property 2 nights ago. I want to know her current whereabouts, and most importantly, I need you to verify something for me. I need to know if she is pregnant." "Consider it done, Mr. Sterling," Finch replied, his voice a calm, professional baritone. There was no surprise, no questions, just execution. The second call was to his legal team. "Pull every document related to Nathaniel's prenuptial agreement with Isabella Rossi," he commanded. "And I want a full independent audit of every expense Genevieve has charged to the household accounts for the last 6 months. I want it on my desk by the time I land." For the rest of the day, Richard went through the motions of his business meetings, but his mind was elsewhere. He was replaying his brief interactions with Isabella. She had always seemed genuine, a little intimidated by their world, perhaps, but her eyes were clear and direct. He remembered her excitement when talking about a medieval art exhibit she was helping to curate. It was a passion that couldn't be faked. He compared that image with the venom in Genevieve's voice over the phone. A discrepancy. Richard Sterling had built his empire by noticing and exploiting discrepancies. The flight back to New York on his private Gulfstream was tense. He didn't sleep. He stared out of the window at the endless carpet of clouds below, a silent fury building within him. If this was true, it wasn't just a family squabble. It was a profound betrayal of his own code. The Sterlings did not prey on the weak. They did not harm women and children. They were predators in the boardroom, yes, but they were supposed to be patricians in their own home. Genevieve's obsession with social status had, he feared, curdled into something ugly and cruel. And Nathaniel. His son's weakness was a constant source of disappointment. If he had allowed this to happen, he was not the man Richard had hoped to one day leave his empire to. When the jet touched down at Teterboro Airport, Alistair Finch was waiting on the tarmac beside the black sedan. He opened the door for Richard, his face an unreadable mask. "Well?" Richard asked as the car pulled silently away. Finch didn't waste words. He handed Richard a slim folder. "Mrs. Davies confirms your wife's account of the confrontation, but her personal observation was that Mrs. Sterling seemed distraught and genuinely confused, not guilty. She was forced to leave without any personal belongings. The security guards on duty confirm she was left on the main road in the middle of the storm. As for her location, she is currently staying with a friend, a Ms. Chloe Davis in Queens." He paused, letting the information sink in before delivering the final crucial piece. "And, sir, I had a trusted medical contact discreetly check with her OB-GYN. Isabella Sterling is indeed 16 weeks pregnant. The paternity was confirmed via a non-invasive prenatal test 6 weeks ago. The father is with 99.9% certainty your son." Richard Sterling closed his eyes. The quiet hum of the luxury car's engine was the only sound. He didn't rage. He didn't shout. A cold, terrifying calm settled over him. The lion had been sleeping content to let others manage his domain. But now he was awake, and he was hungry. "Change of destination, Alistair," he said, his voice like chips of ice. "We're not going to Greenwich. We're going to the city office. It's time to restructure the family." Richard Sterling's Manhattan office, occupying the entire top floor of the Sterling Tower, was a monument to power. It was sleek, minimalist, and offered a panoramic view of the city he had in many ways conquered. But Richard wasn't interested in the view. He sat behind his vast obsidian desk, the slim folder from Alistair Finch lying open before him. On his screen was the household audit he had requested. The numbers told a story of their own, a series of large, unusual payments to a private investigation firm he'd never heard of. Another substantial payment to a digital forensics specialist based out of a shady downtown office. It was a breadcrumb trail of deceit, and Genevieve hadn't been clever enough to hide it from a man who could financially dissect a corporation in his sleep. He summoned his son. Nathaniel arrived an hour later, looking flustered. He likely expected a debrief about the Tokyo trip, perhaps a perfunctory question about the unpleasantness with Isabella. He walked in with a practiced air of weary filial duty. "Father," he began, "welcome back. I trust the trip was successful." Richard didn't answer. He simply gestured to the chair opposite his desk. The silence stretched thick and heavy. Nathaniel shifted uncomfortably. "I imagine Mother filled you in on the situation with your pregnant wife." Richard interrupted, his voice dangerously soft. Nathaniel froze. The blood drained from his face, leaving him pale and gaunt under the office's cool lighting. I don't know what you mean. Don't you?" Richard slid one of the faked photographs across the desk. "Your mother presented you with these, I believe." Nathaniel nodded dumbly. Richard then slid a second piece of paper across the desk. It was the report from Alistair Finch, with a single line highlighted the confirmation of the positive prenatal paternity test. And I assume you had seen this as well. Weeks ago, Richard stated. It was not a question. Nathaniel's composure shattered. He slumped in his chair, a puppet with its strings cut. Father, I can explain. Mother was so certain. The investigator. The pictures looked so real. She said Isabella was trying to trap us, that the baby might not even be mine. His voice trailed off into a pathetic mumble. The excuses of a child caught in a lie. Richard leaned forward, his grey eyes pinning his son in place. There was no anger in his voice, only a chilling, profound disappointment that was infinitely worse. She said the investigator said, "Do you have a mind of your own, Nathaniel, or is it merely a repository for your mother's ambitions and suspicions? Did you ask your wife? Did you look the woman carrying your child in the eye and give her the benefit of a single doubt?" I was confused, Nathaniel whispered, his gaze fixed on the floor. You were a coward, Richard corrected him, the words sharp as shards of glass. You stood by while your mother, my wife, executed a character assassination of the most vulgar and cruel kind. You let her throw your pregnant wife out of her home with nothing. Not a phone to call for help, not $1 for a cab. In a storm. Is that the kind of man you are? Is that the leader I'm supposed to entrust a global enterprise to a man who cannot even manage the affairs of his own house with a shred of decency or courage? Every word was a hammer blow to Nathaniel's already crumbling ego. He had no defense. There was nothing to say. Richard leaned back, his decision made. This is what happens now. You will be suspended from your duties as COO effective immediately. Your corporate accounts will be frozen. Your access to the company jet and vehicles is revoked. You will vacate the Greenwich house by the end of the day. You can stay at the city apartment for now. We will speak again when I decide you've remembered what it means to be a man. Father, no, Nathaniel pleaded, jolted into action. The board, my reputation. You should have thought of your reputation when you abdicated your role as a husband and a father, Richard retorted coldly. Get out of my office. Defeated Nathaniel rose and walked out, his shoulders slumped. The door clicked shut behind him, leaving Richard alone once more. He took no pleasure in his son's humiliation, only a deep, weary sadness. The boy was broken-molded by Genevieve into a weak-willed accessory for her social climbing. Now for the Queen herself. He returned to the Greenwich estate that evening. The house felt different, tainted. Genevieve was in the drawing room, arranging flowers, humming softly to herself. She had re-established her domain. Standing near the fireplace, looking perfectly at home, was a striking brunette woman whom Richard vaguely recognized from society pages. Richard, darling, you're home, Genevieve greeted him, smiling brightly. You remember Victoria Vance, don't you? She was just stopping by to offer her support to Nathaniel. Such a dear. Victoria offered a polite, predatory smile. Mr. Sterling, it's a pleasure to see you again. I was just telling Genevieve how sorry I was to hear of Nathaniel's troubles. Richard ignored her completely. His gaze was locked on his wife. Miss Vance, if you'll excuse us, I need to speak with my wife privately. His tone left no room for argument. Victoria Vance, sensing the shift in temperature, quickly made her excuses and departed. The moment she was gone, Genevieve's smile faltered. Richard, what's wrong? You're being rude. Save it, Genevieve, he said, his voice flat. He tossed the folder from Finch onto the coffee table, right where the faked photos had been. It's all in there. The payments to the PI, the digital artist you hired, the lies you told me, the lies you told our son. Genevieve's face turned ashen. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. But I think what disgusts me most," Richard continued, his voice dropping to a near whisper, "is that you knew she was pregnant. You knew, and you did it anyway. You were willing to orphan my grandchild before he was even born, all for what? To replace a daughter-in-law you deemed unsuitable with that vacuous socialite who just left to preserve your pathetic illusion of a perfect bloodline." He walked over to the window, looking out at the perfectly manicured gardens. "You have mistaken my delegation for apathy for far too long, Genevieve. You have managed my homes, but you do not manage my family. You do not dictate my legacy. And you most certainly do not threaten my blood. I did it for us, for this family." She finally choked out, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and defiance. She was an outsider, a nobody. She wasn't right for us. You did it for you. Richard corrected her, turning back to face her. His expression was utterly devoid of warmth. And in doing so, you have fractured this family in a way you cannot possibly comprehend. You have shown me a capacity for cruelty I can no longer abide under my roof. I will be meeting with my lawyers tomorrow. This marriage, as far as I am concerned, is over. The finality in his voice was absolute. Genevieve Sterling, the untouchable queen of society, the matriarch of the Sterling dynasty, finally understood. She hadn't just made a mistake. She had picked a fight with the one person in her world who had the power to take everything away from her, and she had lost. Richard Sterling's revenge was never going to be a loud theatrical affair. He was a man who moved markets with a quiet phone call, who dismantled competitors with surgical precision. Not a sledgehammer. His retribution against his wife and son would be conducted with the same cold, calculating efficiency. It would be a symphony of consequences orchestrated by a master conductor. His first and most important move was to find Isabella. Chloe Davis's fourth-floor walk-up in Astoria was an unlikely setting for a meeting with a billionaire. When the buzzer rang, Chloe answered with her usual suspicion. "Who is it?" "My name is Richard Sterling." The voice came through the intercom, calm and measured. "I am Isabella's father-in-law. I would like to speak with her. I'm alone, and I come in peace." Chloe and Isabella exchanged a wide-eyed, panicked look. Chloe's protective instincts flared. "Not a chance, buddy. You people have done enough." "Please," the voice said, and for the first time a note of something other than command crept in. It sounded like regret. "I know what my wife and son have done. I am here to make it right. For her, and for my grandchild." Isabella, who had been listening with a hand on her stomach, made a decision. "Let him in, Chloe." Chloe hesitated, then buzzed him up, standing by the door, with her arms crossed, ready for a fight. When Richard Sterling appeared at the doorway, he looked smaller than he did in photographs, and infinitely more tired. He wore a simple grey suit, no tie. He looked at the small, cluttered apartment, then at Isabella, who was sitting on the sofa, wrapped in Chloe's fleece blanket. His gaze was filled with a deep, unmistakable remorse. "Isabella," he said, his voice quiet. "I don't have the words to properly express how sorry I am for the actions of my family. What was done to you was monstrous and unforgivable." He didn't make excuses. He didn't try to explain away Genevieve's or Nathaniel's behavior. He owned it. "I have come here today for 2 reasons," he continued, remaining in the doorway, giving her space. "First, to offer you my sincerest apology, and second, to offer you my unconditional and absolute support in whatever form you choose to accept it." Isabella studied him. She had seen him as a distant, powerful figure, an extension of the cold Sterling Empire. Now she saw a man grappling with a profound failure within his own family. "Why?" she asked softly. "Why now?" "Because I just found out the truth," he said simply. "And because you are the mother of my grandchild. That makes you family. My family. And I do not abandon my family." Over the next hour, he laid out the facts. He told her what he had discovered, how he had confronted Nathaniel, and his intentions regarding Genevieve. He wasn't asking her to come back to the mansion or to forgive his son. He was offering her resources. "I have already opened a trust in your name and a separate one for the child. You will never have to worry about money again," he explained. "I have the best medical team on standby for you. I have located a beautiful brownstone in Park Slope that I would like to purchase for you and the baby, if you like it. And I have retained the services of the most formidable divorce attorney in New York City on your behalf. You will dictate the terms. Nathaniel will comply." Isabella was stunned into silence. This wasn't what she expected. She had been steeling herself for a fight, a long, ugly battle for legitimacy for her child. Instead, she was being handed an arsenal. "I don't want your money, Richard," she said, finding her voice. He nodded, understanding. "I know. This isn't about the money. It's about security. It's about justice, but I ask you to accept it, not as a handout, but as the first of many reparations that are owed to you. Use it to build a life for yourself and my grandchild, a life far away from the poison of my house." She looked at Chloe, who gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. This was real. This was power being handed back to her. "On one condition," Isabella said, her spine straightening. "This isn't just about me. Genevieve and Nathaniel can't just get away with a slap on the wrist. People need to know what they did." A grim smile touched Richard's lips. "I assure you their consequences are just beginning." He was true to his word. The very next day, the second phase of his plan went into effect: the financial and social annihilation. An internal memo at Sterling Global announced that Nathaniel Sterling was taking an indefinite leave of absence for personal reasons, effective immediately. His name was removed from the company letterhead. His corporate credit cards were declined at a 5-star restaurant where he was trying to have lunch with a stunned Victoria Vance. Humiliation was the opening salvo. For Genevieve, the attack was more subtle and far more devastating. Richard didn't need a tabloid. He had a more powerful weapon. He was a major benefactor to the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the New York Philharmonic, and a dozen other high society charities where Genevieve held prestigious board positions. He made a series of quiet calls. He didn't issue threats. He simply expressed his deep disappointment in his wife's recent ethical lapses and suggested that her continued presence on these boards might compromise their integrity and, by extension, future Sterling donations. The effect was instantaneous. One by one, the calls came in. The chair of the museum board reluctantly accepted her resignation. The head of the Philharmonic Gala Committee suggested she might want to sit this season out. Her social circle, a fragile ecosystem built on power and proximity to wealth, evaporated overnight. Friends who had fawned over her for years suddenly didn't return her calls. She was being erased from the world she had so meticulously built. Isabella, meanwhile, was moving into the beautiful sun-drenched brownstone in Brooklyn. It was a home, not a showroom. It had a small garden in the back, perfect for a child. With the resources Richard had provided and Chloe's encouragement, she began to lay the groundwork for a small art consultancy firm specializing in private acquisitions. She was reclaiming her identity, not as Mrs. Sterling, but as Isabella Rossi. She had agreed to let Richard's lawyers handle the divorce. She didn't want a war. She wanted a swift, clean amputation. But she had made one thing clear to them: Nathaniel would have no automatic parental rights. He would have to earn them. Richard Sterling had not only given her a shield, he had handed her a sword, and as she stood in the empty room that would become her baby's nursery, feeling the first real kick from within, she knew she was ready to use it. The age of being a victim was over. The fallout was as swift as it was brutal. The world that Genevieve and Nathaniel Sterling had inhabited didn't crumble. It vanished like a mirage in the desert. Nathaniel's descent was the most pathetic. Stripped of his title, his expense account, and his father's approval, he was a ghost haunting the edges of a life he no longer owned. His fair-weather friends, the ones who had clapped him on the back at exclusive clubs and laughed at his mediocre jokes, now looked right through him. He was no longer the heir apparent. He was just a man in a borrowed suit. The final predictable blow came from Victoria Vance. She had attached herself to the COO of Sterling Global, a man with a limitless trust fund and a direct line to one of the world's great fortunes. What she was left with was a suspended employee living in a company-owned apartment. She met him for one last drink at a bar in the West Village, far from their usual haunts. "I just think we need some space, Nate," she said, stirring her cocktail with a perfectly manicured finger. "This is all just so messy. I have my own reputation to consider." Reputation. Nathaniel scoffed a bitter, unfamiliar sound. "You mean your prospects? My father cut me off Victoria. The money's gone." Her mask of feigned sympathy dropped, replaced by a cold, appraising look. "Well," she said, standing and smoothing her dress, "that is a shame. I hope you sort things out." She didn't look back as she walked out of the bar, leaving him alone with the bill. He wasn't sure he could pay. Her departure was the final confirmation of his irrelevance. He wasn't a person to her. He was a position, and the position was now vacant. Genevieve's isolation was more profound, a chilling portrait of poetic justice. She was trapped in the 30,000-square-foot Greenwich mansion, a queen reigning over an empty kingdom. The household staff, loyal to the man who signed their paychecks, treated her with a frigid, correct politeness that was more unnerving than open hostility. The silence in the vast hallways was deafening, broken only by the ticking of antique clocks counting down the moments of her gilded imprisonment. Her phone, once a constant source of invitations and gossip, remained silent. Her charities had disavowed her. Her social rivals whispered about her downfall with schadenfreude over lunch at Sant Ambroios. They said she'd finally gone too far, that her cruelty had caught up with her. She had built her entire identity on the foundation of the Sterling name and its accompanying social power. With Richard's support withdrawn, she discovered her identity was as hollow as a Faberge egg, beautiful on the outside, but empty within. The final confrontation with Richard took place in the very drawing room where she had condemned Isabella. He didn't come to argue. He came with his lawyer to deliver the terms of their separation. "You can keep the house," Richard said, his tone devoid of any emotion, "and I will provide you with an allowance sufficient to live comfortably. But you will be cut off from all Sterling corporate assets. Your name will be removed from all family trusts. You will sign this post-nuptial agreement, which includes an ironclad non-disclosure clause regarding all family and business matters, or the allowance will be rescinded and I will sell the house." "You can't do this to me, Richard," she hissed, her voice a venomous whisper. "After 40 years of marriage. I built this life with you. No," Richard replied, his gaze unwavering. I built an empire. You decorated it, and you allowed your vanity to threaten its future. You threatened my grandchild. That is a line you do not cross. This is not a negotiation, Genevieve. It is a statement of fact. He stood to leave. The papers will be filed tomorrow. Your lawyers can speak to mine. As he walked away, Genevieve finally broke. Her carefully constructed facade shattered, and she let out a raw, guttural sob of rage and despair. She had played the game of social chess her entire life, and she had just been checkmated by the one piece on the board she always took for granted. While their world imploded, Isabella's was being built brick by brick on a new and solid foundation. The Park Slope brownstone was filled with light and life. Chloe was a constant supportive presence, helping her pick out furniture and paint colors for the nursery. Isabella's art advisory was no longer just an idea. It had a name, a business license, and its first client, a tech mogul Richard had discreetly referred to her. She was rediscovering the woman she was before she became Mrs. Sterling. She spent her days in museums and galleries, her mind sharp and engaged. The work gave her purpose, a sense of self-worth that had nothing to do with a famous last name. She met with her obstetrician regularly, no longer in the sterile, high-end clinic Genevieve had insisted upon, but with a warm, caring doctor in Brooklyn who spoke to her as a person, not a vessel for a dynasty. Her meetings with her divorce lawyer were brief and businesslike. She didn't ask for a punitive settlement. The trusts Richard had established were more than enough. Her only demands were non-negotiable, full legal and physical custody of her child. Nathaniel could petition for visitation rights after the birth, but they would be at her discretion and would be supervised until he could prove he was a stable and positive influence. It was not an act of revenge, but of protection. She was a mother bear guarding her cub. One crisp autumn afternoon, sitting in the half-finished nursery and watching the leaves fall in her small garden, Isabella felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. She was free. The pain of Nathaniel's betrayal still lingered, a dull ache in her heart. But it was no longer the defining feature of her existence. It was a scar, not an open wound. The symphony of consequences that Richard had orchestrated had provided a stark and satisfying justice, but her real victory wasn't their downfall. It was her own ascent. She was building a life of her own making for herself and for the child who would soon fill it with a new kind of music. Winter thawed into a vibrant New York spring. 6 months after she had walked out of the Sterling mansion into the pouring rain, Isabella Rossi walked out of a Brooklyn hospital into the brilliant sunshine, cradling her newborn son, Leo Rossi. He was perfect, with a shock of dark hair like hers, and she thought with a pang she quickly dismissed his father's blue eyes. But his name was hers. He would be raised on her terms, defined by her strength, not by the tarnished legacy of his father's family. Waiting for her at the curb was not a chauffeur-driven limousine, but Richard Sterling himself, driving a discreet but comfortable SUV. He looked older, the lines around his eyes deeper, but there was a light in them she had never seen before. When he saw Leo, his formidable composure melted away, replaced by the unabashed, foolish grin of a new grandfather. "He's a Sterling, all right," Richard said softly, his voice thick with emotion as he gently touched the baby's cheek. "He has that determined look." "He's a Rossi," Isabella corrected him gently but with a smile. "But I suppose he can have a little Sterling determination." Their relationship had transformed into something remarkable and unexpected. He was a constant, steady presence in her life. He never offered unsolicited advice, never overstepped. He was simply there, a source of quiet support, a guardian angel in a bespoke suit. He had become the father she never had, and in her and Leo, he had found a new purpose beyond the boardroom, a chance to build a family legacy based on love and respect, rather than power and fear. The divorce from Nathaniel was finalized with a quiet signature. There were no headlines, no messy court battles. Richard's power had ensured it. Nathaniel, humbled and forced into therapy by his father as a condition of receiving a modest living stipend, had begun the long, arduous process of self-reflection. A few weeks after Leo's birth, he called Isabella. "I know I have no right to ask for anything," he said, his voice stripped of its old, easy arrogance. "But I was hoping I would like to see my son." Isabella took a deep breath. "The first visit will be at my house. Your father will be here. You can stay for 1 hour. And, Nathaniel, this is not for you. It's for Leo. He deserves the chance to know his father, but he also deserves to be protected. You will have to earn his trust, and you will have to earn mine." It was a start. Not forgiveness, not reconciliation, but a path forward. She would never allow the toxicity of the past to poison her son's future, but she also wouldn't let her own pain deny Leo a relationship with his father, should Nathaniel prove himself worthy of one. Genevieve Sterling remained a ghost in her Greenwich palace. The divorce had left her a wealthy woman, but a profoundly impoverished one. She was adrift in a sea of empty rooms and bitter regrets. The society she worshipped had exiled her and her son, whom she had tried to control now barely spoke to her, blaming her for his downfall. She had won her battle against Isabella, but in doing so had lost the entire war, sacrificing her son's happiness, her marriage, and her place in the world for the sake of a pride that now tasted like ash in her mouth. Life in the Park Slope brownstone was full. It was a place of warmth, laughter, and the scent of baby powder. Chloe was a fixture the proudest of aunts, showering Leo with books and affection. Richard visited every Sunday for what he called board meetings with the CEO, which consisted of him holding Leo and making quiet, happy noises. One sunny afternoon, Isabella was in the garden rocking Leo in her arms. Richard was there watching them with a peaceful expression. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "for decades I thought building a legacy was about steel and concrete stock prices and market share. I spent my life acquiring things." He looked at Leo sleeping soundly in Isabella's arms. "I was wrong. This," he said, his voice filled with a quiet reverence, "this is a foundation. Everything else is just scaffolding." Isabella looked down at her son, her heart swelling with a fierce, protective love. The storm had passed. The ruins of her old life were far behind her. Here in this small garden, with her child in her arms and an unlikely ally by her side, she had not just survived. She had built something new, something stronger and more real than any gilded cage. A home, a family, a future, and it was all hers. That's the incredible journey of Isabella Rossi, a story that proves that true power isn't about wealth or a famous last name, but about resilience, integrity, and the unbreakable bond between a mother and her child. She was cast out and betrayed, left with nothing, but she found her strength not in revenge, but in building a new life on her own terms. She turned a devastating betrayal into a story of empowerment and created a new kind of family founded on love and respect. What do you think about Richard's form of justice? Was it too harsh, or exactly what Genevieve and Nathaniel deserved? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of justice and resilience resonated with you, please hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe for more real-life dramas where the truth always finds its way to the light. Thanks for listening. For the world. Genevieve Lacroix Sterling had it all: the coveted Fifth Avenue penthouse overlooking Central Park, a portfolio that rivaled a small nation's GDP, and a husband, Arthur Sterling, whose name was a titan in global finance. Their life was a carefully curated masterpiece of porcelain perfection. But behind the hand-painted Gracie wallpaper and the soft glow of Tiffany lamps, a rot was spreading. One Tuesday night, in the one room that was supposed to be a sanctuary of pure love, their unborn son's nursery, Genevieve would stumble upon a betrayal so profound it fractured the very air she breathed. This isn't just a story of infidelity. It's the story of what happens when a woman of immense grace is pushed to the edge and discovers the steel underneath. The air in the penthouse at 834 Fifth Avenue was always different. A climate-controlled, triple-filtered atmosphere that smelled vaguely of money-white florals and the faintest hint of lemon polish from the daily ministrations of a silent, efficient staff. For Genevieve Lacroix Sterling, it was the scent of home, a scent she had carefully curated over 7 years of marriage to Arthur Sterling. Tonight, however, a discordant note had crept in. It was just past 10 p.m. on a Tuesday. Arthur was supposed to be at a late-night merger dinner with Japanese investors, a common occurrence in their world. Genevieve, 8 months pregnant and feeling the full weight of it in her lower back, had spent the evening in her personal study, finalizing a philanthropic bid for the new wing of the MoMA. Her family, the Lacroix dynasty of old-world textiles, had taught her that a woman's power wasn't just in the man she married, but in the legacy she built herself. A sudden thirst pulled her from her work. She padded barefoot across the cool Italian marble of the grand hallway, her hand resting instinctively on the perfect, taut globe of her stomach. The baby, whom they had already named Leo, kicked gently a familiar, reassuring flutter. She smiled. Everything was for him. The life they were building, the quiet power of their names, combined the future stretching out before them, like the park sprawling beneath their windows. All of it was for Leo. She passed the cavernous living room, its walls adorned with a Rothko and a small, exquisite Degas sculpture. The lights were low, casting long shadows. Strange. Maria, the head housekeeper, was meticulous about turning everything off before she and the staff retired to their wing. Genevieve paused, a flicker of unease prickling her skin. She heard a sound, not from the living room, but further down the hall. A faint, muffled giggle. It came from the direction of the nursery. Her heart gave a strange, painful lurch. Why would anyone be in the nursery? It was her sanctuary within a sanctuary. She had overseen every detail, from the hand-stitched constellations on the silk ceiling to the commissioned Beatrix Potter murals that danced across the walls. The scent in there was supposed to be one thing only: the gentle, calming aroma of lavender and chamomile she spritzed on the linens each night, a ritual of welcome for her son. Quietly, her bare feet making no sound, she moved toward the heavy, soundproofed oak door. The giggling came again, clearer this time. Feminine and breathless. It was followed by a low murmur. A man's voice, Arthur's voice. Confusion warred with a sudden, sickening dread. The Japanese dinner. He had texted her an hour ago, a picture of a sake bottle with the caption, "Closing the deal for us, my love." For you and Leo." Her hand trembled as she reached for the large, cold brass doorknob. She didn't turn it. Instead, she pushed. The door was ajar, left open just a crack. It swung inward without a sound. The scene that met her eyes would be burned into her memory for the rest of her life, a searing brand on her soul. The only light came from a small moon-shaped nightlight near the crib, casting a soft, ethereal glow on the two figures. Arthur, his billion-dollar Brioni suit jacket discarded on the rocking chair, had a woman pinned against the wall, right under a mural of Peter Rabbit. Her dress, a slick sheath of red silk that Genevieve had never seen before, was hiked up around her waist. His hands were tangled in her long, dark hair, and her head was thrown back, a silent laugh on her lips. Genevieve recognized her instantly. It was Serafina Vance, the daughter of Marcus Vance, the CEO of Vance Capital, a rival firm Arthur had been in a protracted and hostile acquisition battle with for the better part of a year. Serafina, with her sharp features and even sharper reputation, was a fixture on the gossip pages, always draped on the arm of some European playboy or tech billionaire. But it wasn't the identity of the woman that shattered Genevieve. It was the location. They were in the nursery, her baby's room. They were leaning against the wall where Leo would one day rest his head. Their lust-filled panting was mingling with the gentle scent of lavender she'd sprayed for her son. The crib, a magnificent piece of hand-carved cherrywood that had been in her family for 3 generations, stood just feet away, a silent witness to this ultimate desecration. For a moment that stretched into an eternity, Genevieve couldn't breathe. The air was stolen from her lungs. The world narrowed to a pinprick of nauseating light. She saw the details with a horrible, crystalline clarity. The way Serafina's red lacquered nails dug into Arthur's shoulders, the smug, proprietary look in her eyes as she met Arthur's gaze, the way his Patek Philippe. Watch a gift from Genevieve for their 5th anniversary glinted in the dim light as his hand moved down Serafina's back. They hadn't seen her. They were lost in their own sordid world, defiling the most sacred space in her life. A primal scream built in her throat, hot and acidic, but she swallowed it down. She would not give them the satisfaction of a scene. She would not break down in front of them. The Lacroix women did not cry. They calculated. Her grandmother's words echoed in her mind from a lifetime ago. Tears are for the weak, mon chéri. The strong build empires from their pain. With a control she didn't know she possessed, Genevieve backed away. She pulled the door until it was almost shut, leaving only the tiniest crack. She moved backward, step by silent step, her hand still pressed against her stomach, no longer in maternal bliss but as a shield, protecting Leo, protecting herself. She retreated to the far end of the penthouse, to the guest suite that faced the glittering lights of the city, a room rarely used. She locked the door, her movements stiff and robotic. She didn't turn on the lights. She sank onto the edge of the unfamiliar bed, the brocade cold against her skin. She didn't cry. She sat in the darkness, the image of the red dress and the Peter Rabbit mural playing on a loop in her mind. The silence of the vast apartment was broken only by the frantic, silent beating of her own heart. The betrayal was absolute. It wasn't just an affair. It was a declaration of war, waged in the heart of her future. And Arthur, in his arrogance, had just armed his enemy with a weapon of unimaginable power, a mother's righteous fury. She took a deep, shuddering breath and pulled out her phone. She didn't scroll to her mother or her best friend. She scrolled to a name filed under J.C. The call connected on the second ring. "Alger," she said, her voice a dead, flat calm that frightened even her. "It's Genevieve Sterling. I need you. I need you to bring the papers. Everything we discussed in the contingency plan. Bring them tomorrow morning. 10 a.m. sharp." The other side of the line was silent for a beat, the kind of silence that conveyed complete understanding. Alger Brush was not a man given to platitudes or unnecessary questions. At 62, with a mane of silver hair and a reputation for being the most ruthless divorce attorney in New York, he had seen and heard everything. He had drafted Genevieve's prenuptial agreement 7 years ago, and at her quiet insistence had created a confidential and far more aggressive post-nuptial contingency document 2 years later, after she first felt the subtle shift in Arthur's priorities. Arthur had laughed when she'd presented a watered-down version of it, for his signature calling it her little project. He had no idea about the real document locked in Alger's vault. 10 a.m. Alger's voice was a low baritone devoid of surprise. "Is the asset secure?" In their coded language, the asset was not a stock or a bond. It was Genevieve's well-being and, by extension, the well-being of her unborn child. "The asset is contained," Genevieve replied, her gaze distant, fixed on the distant glow of the Chrysler Building. "But the environment has been compromised, irreversibly." "I understand. No further contact. Do not engage. Acknowledge nothing. I'll handle everything from this point on. A car will be waiting for you at the service entrance at 7 a.m. It will take you to the Stanhope. I've already secured the presidential suite under a holding company name. You will not be disturbed. Thank you, Alger." "Genevieve." He said, a rare note of something other than business in his voice. "You are the granddaughter of Antoinette Lacroix. Remember who you are." He disconnected. Genevieve lowered the phone, the words hanging in the air. "Remember who you are." Her grandmother had been a force of nature, a woman who had rebuilt the family's textile empire from the ashes of post-war Europe with little more than a loom and an indomitable will. She did not suffer fools, and she certainly did not suffer betrayal. Genevieve spent the next few hours in a state of suspended animation. She didn't sleep. She sat. The city lights blurred into a watercolor wash outside the window. She felt Leo stir again, a more insistent movement this time, as if sensing his mother's distress. She stroked her belly, whispering to him in the dark. "It's all right, my love. Mama's here. Mama will fix this. I will build a fortress around you, and no one will ever hurt you." Around 3 a.m., she heard the faint sounds of Arthur moving about the apartment, the clink of a glass, the heavy tread of his footsteps, then the soft click of their bedroom door opening and closing. He had finally finished with his conquest and retired to their marital bed, likely reeking of Serafina Vance's cheap perfume and self-satisfaction. The thought sent a wave of icy resolve through her, extinguishing the last embers of her grief. At 6 a.m., before the sun had fully risen over the East River, Genevieve moved. Her actions were precise and economical. She packed a single Rimowa suitcase with essentials, a few changes of comfortable maternity clothes from Loro Piana, her toiletries, her laptop, and a small, worn, leather-bound book of her grandmother's maxims. She left behind the diamonds, the couture gowns, the entire life that was a lie. In the master bathroom, she took her wedding and engagement rings, a flawless 10-carat diamond that had been featured in Vogue, and placed them deliberately in the center of Arthur's sink. A small, final gesture. She slipped out of the apartment through the service corridors, she knew better than he did a remnant of her hands-on approach to managing their home. The staff elevator descended silently, and as promised, a black, unassuming Cadillac Escalade was waiting in the delivery bay. The driver, a man whose face was a stony mask, simply opened the door for her, took her suitcase, and closed her into the plush leather interior. As the car pulled out onto a sleepy 64th Street, her phone buzzed. A text from Arthur. "Morning, my love. Woke up and you weren't here. Everything okay?" The dinner went on forever. Exhausted. "See you for breakfast." Another buzz. "Where are you?" Maria said. "She hasn't seen you." Genevieve stared at the messages, a bitter smile touching her lips. The casual ease of his lies was breathtaking. She didn't reply. She powered the phone off and dropped it into her Hermès bag. She would not be gaslit. She would not be manipulated. The conversation was over. From now on, Alger Brush would do the talking. The suite at the Stanhope was magnificent, a classic old-world space with sweeping views of the park from the north. It felt anonymous and safe. A light breakfast of fruit yogurt and decaffeinated tea was already laid out. She ate mechanically, forcing herself to nourish her body, to nourish Leo. She was no longer just Genevieve. She was a vessel for the next generation of her family, and she had a duty to protect him. At 9:55 a.m., her temporary phone provided by Alger's team chimed. It was Alger. "We are walking into the lobby of your building now. Are you ready?" Genevieve looked at her reflection in the grand mirror of the suite. The woman staring back was pale, and her eyes were shadowed, but they held a fire that hadn't been there 24 hours ago. The soft, accommodating wife was gone. In her place stood the heiress to the Lacroix fortune, a woman about to reclaim her name and her life. "I was born ready, Alger," she said. Arthur Sterling woke with a familiar dull headache that only a $5,000 bottle of Suntory whiskey could produce. He rolled over in the vast bed, reaching for Genevieve, his mind still foggy. The space beside him was empty and cold. He frowned, sitting up. That was odd. Jen was always an early riser, but she usually read in the sitting area of their bedroom until he woke. He saw her rings in the bathroom sink. A sliver of unease, sharp and unwelcome, cut through his hangover. It wasn't an angry gesture like throwing them. It was a placement. Deliberate. Final. He splashed water on his face, trying to clear his head. The details of the night before were a bit of a blur. Serafina had been enthusiastic. It was a thrill doing it with her right under his own roof. The danger, the sheer audacity of it, especially with her father being his corporate nemesis, had been a potent aphrodisiac. And the nursery. That had been Serafina's idea, a wickedly decadent suggestion. He'd been too drunk and aroused to refuse. It was just a room, after all. He convinced himself Jen had probably gone to her mother's in Connecticut for the day. She did that sometimes when she needed space, though usually after a discussion. He'd smooth it over. He was Arthur Sterling. He could smooth anything over. He'd buy her a new piece of art, a ridiculously expensive bracelet from JR, and she'd melt just like she always did. He threw on a cashmere robe and padded out to the breakfast nook, expecting to find the Wall Street Journal laid out next to his freshly squeezed orange juice. Instead, he found Maria, their housekeeper, looking flustered. "Good morning, Mr. Sterling, Mrs. Sterling left very early this morning." "Yes, I know, Maria. Did she say where she was going?" "No, sir." A car picked her up from the service entrance. The service entrance? The unease sharpened into genuine alarm. Genevieve never used the service entrance. Just then the chime of the private elevator that opened directly into their foyer sounded. Arthur relaxed. It was probably her back, already ready for his apology and the inevitable reconciliation. He composed his face into a mask of charming contrition as he walked toward the sound. The elevator doors slid open. It wasn't Genevieve. It was a man he vaguely recognized from society events, a silver-haired shark in a suit so impeccably tailored it seemed molded to his frame. Behind him stood a younger, equally severe-looking associate, clutching a thick leather briefcase. "Alger Brush." The man said, his voice as cool and hard as the marble floor. He didn't offer a hand. "We have an appointment." Arthur's mind raced. Alger Brush. Genevieve's family lawyer. The man who handled her trust and philanthropic endeavors. What the hell was he doing here, Brush? This is unexpected, Arthur stammered, trying to regain his footing. "Genevieve isn't here. We know," Alger said, stepping out of the elevator as if he owned the place. His associate followed a silent shadow. "Our business is with you, Mr. Sterling." He gestured toward the formal living room. "Shall we?" It wasn't a question. Stunned into silence, Arthur led them into the room dominated by the Rothko. He felt absurdly exposed in his cashmere robe. Alger Brush and his associate sat on the pristine white sofa, placing the briefcase on the glass coffee table between them with a heavy definitive thud. "I don't understand." Arthur began running a hand through his disheveled hair. "What is this about?" Alger snapped open the briefcase. He extracted a sheaf of documents, thick and bound in blue. He slid it across the table toward Arthur. "This," Alger said, his eyes locking onto Arthur's, "is a petition for the dissolution of marriage between Genevieve Lacroix Sterling and Arthur Sterling, filed with the Supreme Court of the State of New York an hour ago on the grounds of adultery." The words hit Arthur like a physical blow. Dissolution. Adultery. He stared at the papers, his mind refusing to process what he was seeing. "This is insane." He sputtered, a nervous laugh escaping his lips. "A misunderstanding. Jen is just upset. We had a small disagreement." "There is no misunderstanding, Mr. Sterling." Alger continued, his tone unwavering. "The petition also includes an immediate ex parte application for exclusive use and occupancy of this residence, the Hamptons estate in Sagaponack, and the chalet in Gstaad. It freezes a list of joint assets detailed on page 12, effective immediately. And it contains a temporary restraining order, preventing you from contacting, harassing, or coming within 500 feet of my client." Arthur's face paled. "You can't be serious." 500 feet. She's my wife. She's pregnant with my child. A child whose developmental sanctuary you saw fit to defile last night with Miss Serafina Vance at approximately 10:15 p.m. Alger stated without a flicker of emotion. The blood drained from Arthur's face. He felt as if the floor had dropped out. From under him, she had seen, Genevieve had seen them. The deliberate placement of the rings in the sink suddenly made a horrifying kind of sense. It wasn't an act of petulance. It was a verdict. "Where is she?" he demanded, his voice rising in panic. "I need to talk to her." "You will do no such thing," Alger said, rising to his feet. "From this moment forward, all communication will go through my office, and I assure you my client has nothing to say to you. You have 24 hours to have your attorney contact me. A list of our non-negotiable preliminary demands is on page 3. I suggest you read it very carefully." Alger nodded to his associate, who placed another, slimmer document on the table. "That is a copy of the restraining order. A process server is waiting downstairs to serve you officially. We are leaving now." I'd advise you to vacate the premises by the end of the day to avoid a rather unpleasant scene with the NYPD. Arthur was speechless, his mind a maelstrom of shock fury and a dawning, terrifying sense of loss. He had underestimated her. He had seen her grace and mistaken it for fragility. He had seen her quietness and mistaken it for weakness. He had thought he was the titan, the master of their universe, but in one swift, silent move, she had checkmated him. As Alger Brush turned to leave, Arthur's desperation curdled into righteous anger. This was an overreaction, a dramatic, hysterical overreaction. "This is because of Vance, isn't it?" He snarled, a new theory forming in his panicked mind. "She's colluding with Marcus Vance. This is a corporate tactic, using his daughter to set me up, and having Jenin pull this stunt to get leverage in the acquisition." Alger paused at the elevator, turning back slowly. A ghost of a smile, cold and predatory, touched his lips. It was the first hint of emotion he had shown, and it was terrifying. "Mr. Sterling," he said the words dripping with condescension, "you still don't get it. You are a man who looks at a masterpiece and sees only the price tag. You think this is about business. You think this is about leverage. You are, if you'll forgive the candor, a fool." He stepped into the elevator. "This isn't about your deal with Vance Capital. This is about what you did in a room full of Beatrix Potter murals. You have gravely misunderstood the woman you married, and you are about to pay a price far greater than any corporate acquisition." The elevator doors slid shut, leaving Arthur Sterling alone in his magnificent living room, a man suddenly stripped of everything, clutching a set of papers that represented the complete and utter demolition of his life. In her suite at the Stanhope, Genevieve was not idle. While Alger was dismantling Arthur's world, she was calmly assembling her war room. A team from Alger's office had delivered encrypted laptops and secure hard drives. Spread across the antique dining table were not magazines and novels, but financial statements, trust documents and corporate holding charts she had been quietly compiling for the last 2 years. She was not the pampered wife Arthur believed her to be. Her father, a shrewd and loving man, had insisted she get her MBA from Wharton the same as him. "You must be able to read a balance sheet as easily as you read Proust Mafila," he'd always said. While Arthur was out courting investors and preening for the financial press, Genevieve had been the one poring over the fine print of his deals, often catching errors or liabilities his own team had missed. She was the silent architect of some of his greatest successes, a fact he conveniently forgot to mention in boardrooms or interviews. The first order of business was Serafina Vance. Genevieve had always dismissed her as a vacuous socialite, a tool her father Marcus Vance used for public relations, but her presence in the nursery was too specific, too targeted. It felt less like a crime of passion and more like a strategic move. "Alger, I want everything on her," Genevieve said over a secure line. "Not the gossip column trash. I want to know who she talks to, where her money comes from her travel logs for the past 6 months. Hire PIs. The best. I don't care what it costs." Already underway, Alger confirmed. "I have a team from Kroll on it. We should have a preliminary report by evening." The report that landed in her encrypted inbox at 7 p.m. was more damning than she could have imagined. Serafina Vance was far from a simple party girl. She had a degree in finance from LSE and held a discreet but powerful position within her father's company, Director of Opposition Research. Her job was to dig up dirt on competitors, identify weaknesses, and exploit them. Her recent romances with tech CEOs and hedge fund managers all curiously preceded major market moves or failed acquisitions involving Vance Capital. She wasn't a mistress. She was a corporate saboteur. The PI's report included discreetly obtained photographs. Serafina meeting with one of Arthur's disgruntled former board members. Serafina having lunch with a journalist known for his scathing takedowns of high-profile CEOs. And the final sickening piece of the puzzle phone records showing dozens of calls and texts between her and Arthur over the past 4 months, a timeline that directly corresponded with a series of mysterious leaks from within Sterling Industries that had damaged their stock price and complicated the Vance Capital acquisition. Arthur hadn't just cheated on her. He had been sleeping with the enemy actively and willingly, conspiring with a woman whose entire purpose was to destroy him, and by extension, their family. The sheer breathtaking stupidity of it almost made her laugh. His ego, his belief that he could control and manipulate everyone, had made him the perfect mark. The next morning, Alger's team forwarded a new piece of intelligence, this one a bombshell. A source inside Vance Capital, cultivated by Alger's investigators, revealed the end game. Serafina's mission was to get close enough to Arthur to obtain sensitive information about a proprietary trading algorithm Sterling Industries had developed code-named Prometheus. This algorithm was the company's crown jewel, the engine behind its massive profits. The plan was for Vance Capital to use this information to sabotage the acquisition from the inside, trigger a stock collapse, and then scoop up Sterling Industries for pennies on the dollar. The betrayal now had a price tag, the entire Sterling empire, valued at roughly $9 billion. Genevieve sat back, the information swirling in her mind. This changed the entire battlefield. This was no longer a domestic dispute. It was corporate warfare, and Serafina and Arthur had just handed her the ammunition. But how to use it, exposing the plot publicly, would crater Sterling Industries' stock, harming her own assets and Leo's inheritance in the process. She needed to be smarter, more precise. She thought back to her grandmother, Antoinette. Antoinette had once faced a hostile takeover from a British conglomerate. They had tried to blackmail her, threatening to expose a youthful indiscretion of her late husband. Instead of cowering, Antoinette had called a press conference, admitted to the long-past issue on her own terms with grace and dignity, and then systematically revealed every dirty trick, every instance of financial malfeasance and insider trading the British firm had ever committed, which her own team had been quietly researching for months. She hadn't just won, she had annihilated them. The conglomerate was buried in lawsuits and government investigations for a decade. Never fight on their terms. Genevieve, her grandmother's voice echoed. Create your own battlefield. Genevieve picked up the phone to Alger. Alger. The plan has changed, she said, her voice clear and decisive. We are no longer just filing for divorce. We are going on the offensive. I want you to arrange a meeting, not with Arthur's lawyers. I want a meeting with Marcus Vance, and I want to be there. There was a pause. Genevieve. That's highly unorthodox. It could compromise our position. No, Alger. She corrected him gently but firmly. It is our position. Marcus Vance thinks he's playing chess with my husband. He's about to find out he's been playing checkers with me. And I'm about to flip the board over. She had one more call to make. A number she hadn't dialed in years. It was to a man named Jean-Luc, her grandmother's former head of security in Paris. A man who owed his life to the Lacroix family. He was now retired, but his skills and his network were legendary. Jean-Luc, said Genevieve, she said when he answered. I have a small project for you in New York. I need to know everything about a man named Marcus Vance. Not the corporate profile. I want to know where he buries his secrets. I have a feeling he and I have a great deal to talk about." The woman who had wept silently in a guest room just 2 days ago was gone. In her place was a strategist, a commander marshalling her forces. Arthur had started a fire thinking he could control it. He had no idea he was about to be consumed by it. Arthur Sterling was a man adrift in a sea of his own making. He had been served officially and humiliatingly in the lobby of his own building. He had retreated not to a hotel, but to his bachelor pad, a sterile, glass-walled apartment in Tribeca he kept for poker nights, a fact he now realized was probably well known to Genevieve's investigators. His first call had been to his own lawyer, a bulldog named Frank Miller, known more for bluster than brilliance. Frank had been apoplectic. "Are you insane, Arthur?" he'd yelled over the phone. "In the nursery. With the daughter of the guy you're trying to take over. Do you have any idea how this looks? They'll crucify you. We have to prove this is a setup." But Arthur knew it wasn't. It was pure, unadulterated arrogance on his part. He had spent 2 days trying to contact Genevieve, a barrage of texts and voicemails that went unanswered. He'd sent flowers, a veritable forest of orchids, to her mother's home in Connecticut, only to receive a call from his mother-in-law, a woman who had always adored him, whose voice was now colder than a winter tombstone. "Don't you ever contact this family again," she had said, before hanging up. The first legal volley from Alger Brush's office was a masterpiece of financial warfare. It wasn't just the petition. It was a series of injunctions and liens placed on assets Arthur didn't even think Genevieve knew about. A holding company in the Cayman Islands, a portfolio of rare watches held in a Swiss vault, his shares in a tech startup he'd invested in with his poker buddies. The prenuptial agreement they had signed was solid, designed to protect their individual assets going into the marriage. Genevieve's Lacroix inheritance was untouchable, as was Arthur's seed money for Sterling Industries. However, the prenup stipulated that any wealth created during the marriage would be split 60-40 in his favor, a point of pride for him at the time. But Alger Brush was ignoring the prenup. His filing argued for it to be thrown out entirely, citing extreme emotional duress and a pattern of deceit that constitutes gross marital misconduct. Instead, he was pushing for a net to 50. 50 split of all assets, including the foundational value of Sterling Industries, under a new interpretation of marital asset law. It was an audacious, almost ludicrous claim, but it was designed to do one thing: bog Arthur down in a legal quagmire that would cost him millions in fees and bleed him dry. "They're coming after the company." Arthur Frank Miller panicked. "They're trying to argue that her support and counsel were integral to the company's growth, making it a fully shared marital asset. It's bullshit, but it's expensive bullshit." Arthur tried to fight back. He had his accountants attempt to move funds to shift assets into new untraceable accounts. But at every turn, he was blocked. It was as if Genevieve had a map of his entire financial soul. He'd forgotten about the late nights she'd spent helping him organize his paperwork for the IRS, the way she'd created spreadsheets to track their myriad investments. He had seen it as wifely duty. She had been gathering intelligence. The battlefield was drawn. His strategy was to paint Genevieve as an unstable, hormonal, pregnant woman having an irrational overreaction. Their first motion was to demand a psychological evaluation, a nasty, brutish tactic designed to intimidate. Alger Brush's response was swift and devastating. He filed a counter-motion that included a sworn affidavit from Maria the head housekeeper detailing Arthur's increasingly frequent late nights and the scent of unfamiliar perfume on his clothes for months. It included a statement from their doorman, who noted the regular late-night visits of a woman in a red sports car to the building's garage. And it included the PI's preliminary report on Serafina Vance, framing Arthur not as a simple adulterer, but as a man with reckless judgment unfit to be a CEO or a father who had willfully endangered his family and his company by consorting with a known corporate saboteur. The request for a psych evaluation was laughed out of the judge's chambers. Score 1 for Genevieve. Meanwhile, Genevieve was orchestrating her own financial maneuvers. The contingency document she had signed with Alger 2 years prior, the one Arthur didn't know about, gave Alger Brush power of attorney over her personal finances in the event of a marital breakdown. Using this, they began quietly liquidating certain joint assets that were still fluid, converting them to cash, and placing them in a new trust, solely in her and Leo's names. More importantly, she was using her own vast, untouchable Lacroix funds to her advantage. She hired a team of forensic accountants, the best in the world, to tear apart Sterling Industries' books. Not to find fault with the company, but to identify every single contribution, direct or indirect, she had made. The team uncovered an email from 6 years ago, when the company was struggling. Genevieve had used her Lacroix connections to secure a meeting with a notoriously reclusive French luxury goods magnate. That meeting led to a massive company-saving investment. Arthur had taken full credit. They found the initial wireframe designs for their first successful trading interface, sketched on a napkin by Genevieve, who had a surprising talent for user experience logic. Arthur had passed them off to his tech team as his own. They found proof that the seed money for a crucial subsidiary had come from the sale of a Monet that had been a wedding gift to Genevieve from her parents. Piece by piece, she was building a case that she was not just the woman behind the man. In many ways, she was the man. The 60-40 clause in the prenup was starting to look less like a generous offer from him and more like a theft perpetrated by him. The pressure was mounting on Arthur. His board was getting nervous. News of the restraining order and the allegations of consorting with a rival had been strategically leaked to a prominent financial columnist. His world was shrinking, his power draining away. He was trapped fighting a war on 2 fronts, one for his company and one for his personal fortune, and the general on the other side knew all his secrets. He felt a primal rage building, the unfairness of it all. So he'd made a mistake. A stupid one. Yes, but was it worth all this? The destruction of everything he'd built. In his mind, he was the victim. Now, a man besieged by a vengeful wife and her cutthroat lawyer. He had to do something drastic. He had to find a weakness, an ace of his own. And his mind, clouded with fear and fury, landed on the one thing they both held sacred, their unborn son. Arthur's new strategy was as desperate as it was cruel. Through his lawyer, he filed a motion for parental rights. It was a standard move in a divorce with children, but the language was venomous. He accused Genevieve of being emotionally unstable and of planning to flee the country to France with the baby after its birth, effectively kidnapping his son and heir. He demanded court-mandated co-parenting classes and a legal framework that would give him joint custody from the moment of birth. He was attempting to tether her to him, to use their child as a permanent leash. When Alger informed her of the filing, Genevieve felt a cold fury unlike anything before. It was one thing to fight over money. It was another thing entirely to use their innocent, unborn child as a pawn in his sordid game. He has no idea what he's just done, she said quietly into the phone, her hand resting protectively on her stomach. Leo was due in less than 4 weeks. The meeting with Marcus Vance was set. It was to take place in a neutral location, a private conference room at the offices of Skadden Arps, a firm so powerful it was like a sovereign nation unto itself. Alger had advised against her attending, but Genevieve was adamant. She needed to look Marcus Vance in the eye. She walked into the room not as a victim, but as a CEO. She wore a custom-made navy blue dress from The Row that was elegant and professional, accommodating her pregnancy without making it the focal point. Her hair was pulled back in a severe chignon. Her face was a mask of calm composure. Marcus Vance was there with 2 of his own lawyers. He was a man in his late 60s, with a weathered face and the predatory stillness of a patient hunter. He regarded Genevieve with a look that was a mixture of pity and curiosity. Arthur was nowhere to be seen, excluded from the meeting by mutual agreement. Mrs. Sterling Marcus began his voice a gravelly rumble. I want to say on a personal level that I am sorry for my daughter's involvement in your personal affairs. Genevieve held up a hand, stopping him. Mr. Vance, let's dispense with the pleasantries. I am not here for an apology. I am here to discuss the future of our respective companies. Marcus's eyebrows shot up. His lawyers shifted uncomfortably. Your daughter Genevieve continued, her voice level and cold, was tasked with seducing my husband to acquire the source code for our Prometheus algorithm. The plan was to devalue Sterling Industries and allow you to acquire it at a discount. A solid, if rather cliché, strategy. She let that hang in the air. Marcus Vance's face remained impassive, but she saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Confirmation. Here is what is going to happen now, Genevieve said, leaning forward slightly. Your acquisition attempt is over, effective immediately. You will withdraw your offer and issue a public statement, citing unfavorable market conditions. One of Vance's lawyers started to speak, but Marcus silenced him with a glance. And why would I do that? He asked. This was the moment. This was her grandmother's press conference. Genevieve looked at Alger, who slid a single slim folder across the mahogany table. That Genevieve said is a preliminary report from my investigators. It contains bank statements tracing 3 separate payments from a shell corporation you control in Panama, directly to one of my husband's board members, a Mr. Henderson. It also contains a recording of your daughter Serafina bragging to a friend about how she had my husband wrapped around her little finger and would soon have the keys to his kingdom. The SEC tends to take a rather dim view of market manipulation, corporate espionage, and insider trading. Marcus's face tightened. He had underestimated her completely. He thought he was dealing with the fool Arthur. He didn't realize the Queen was in play. And that's just the appetizer, Mr. Vance, Genevieve said, pressing her advantage. My associate in Paris, a man who is exceptionally good at his job, has been looking into your own company's history, specifically your acquisition of a German pharmaceutical firm in 2012. He found some irregularities. Bribes paid to government officials through a Swiss art dealer. A very messy business. It would be a shame if that information found its way to the Bundesanstalt für Finanzdienstleistungsaufsicht. Marcus Vance was silent for a long time. He stared at Genevieve, a new respect dawning in his cold eyes. He had been outmaneuvered. What do you want? He finally asked. I've told you. You will back off from Sterling Industries. But there's a second part to my terms. I am in the process of divorcing my husband. The legal battle will be complex. I am going to need to secure a majority stake in the company to protect my son's future. To do that, I need capital and leverage." She paused, letting the implication sink in. "Your daughter put my family at risk," Genevieve said, her voice dropping to an icy whisper. "And for that, there is a price. You are going to provide me with the leverage. You will sell me through a private trust my lawyer has established the 15% stake in Sterling Industries that you have already quietly acquired on the open market over the last year. You will sell it to me at a 20% discount from yesterday's closing price." Vance's lawyer gasped. "That's outrageous. That stake is worth over $1 billion. It's worth far more than the cost of having your entire company investigated for bribery, and your daughter indicted for corporate espionage," Alger Brush interjected smoothly. "Consider it a family discount." Genevieve stood up. The meeting was over. She held all the cards. Marcus Vance knew it. She had turned his own weapon against him. His attempt to destroy her family was now going to be the very thing that saved it for her and for her son. "You have 24 hours to have your people contact Mr. Brush with the signed agreements," she said, turning to leave. "And Mr. Vance, tell your daughter to stay out of my city and my nursery." She walked out of the room without a backward glance, leaving a stunned Marcus Vance to stare at the folder on the table, the symbol of his complete and utter defeat. This was her ace. It wasn't just a secret asset. It was a strategic masterstroke. Arthur thought he was fighting her for money. She was fighting for control. And she was about to become the majority shareholder of the company he thought was his. The fallout was swift and silent. The following day, Vance Capital issued a terse press release officially withdrawing its bid for Sterling Industries. The market was confused, but the move was decisive. That same afternoon, over $1 billion worth of Sterling stock was transferred to an anonymous trust, the transaction hidden deep within the day's block trades. Just like that, Genevieve Lacroix Sterling, through her son's trust, became the silent majority power behind the company. Arthur knew none of this. He was still trying to fight a war that was already lost. His lawyer, Frank Miller, was growing increasingly frantic, as every legal avenue they tried was shut down with surgical precision by Alger Brush's team. Arthur's motion for custody had been countered with a devastating psychological profile of him painting him as a narcissist, with reckless judgment, using sworn testimony from former colleagues and the damning evidence of the Serafina Vance affair. The final confrontation did not happen in a courtroom. Genevieve had no desire for a public spectacle. She agreed to one final meeting to settle the terms of the divorce. It was held in Alger Brush's office, a space that felt like a judicial chamber with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the steel canyons of Midtown. Arthur arrived looking diminished. The swagger was gone, replaced by a haggard weariness. He had lost weight, and his expensive suit seemed to hang off his frame. He sat opposite Genevieve at the long conference table. It was the first time they had been in the same room since that fateful night. He couldn't meet her eyes. "Jen, please," he began, his voice raspy. "Let's stop this. We can work this out. For Leo." Genevieve looked at him, and for the first time she felt not anger, but a profound emptiness. He was still trying to manipulate her, still using their son's name as a tool. "The time for us to work this out, Arthur, ended when you brought another woman into our child's nursery," she said, her voice calm and devoid of emotion. "We are here to sign the papers." Alger slid the final settlement agreement across the table. "The terms are non-negotiable, Arthur," he said. Arthur's lawyer, Frank, began to bluster. "Now hold on. A 50-50 split of all marital assets, including the company." "My client will never agree to." "Oh, we're well past that." Alger interrupted, a slight smile on his face. He slid a second document across the table. It was a shareholder disclosure form. Arthur picked it up. He read it. His face went from pale to ashen. He read it again, his eyes widening in disbelief as he looked at the name of the trust and its controlling interest. He looked up at Genevieve, his mouth agape. How was all he could manage to whisper? "You thought this was a divorce," Arthur Genevieve said, finally meeting his gaze. Her eyes were like chips of ice. "This was a leveraged buyout. You put this company, my son's legacy, at risk with your recklessness. I simply secured it." The reality crashed down on him. She owned him. She controlled the company he had built. He was the CEO, but she was now the board. He served at her pleasure. The power dynamic had not just shifted, it had been completely inverted. "The settlement is this," Alger stated plainly. "Genevieve will waive her claim to a 50-50 split. She is, after all, a benevolent majority shareholder." The sarcasm was subtle, but sharp. "Instead, you will cede this apartment, the Hamptons estate, and the full art collection to her. You will fund a trust for Leo with $200 million in cash. Your own assets will remain yours. You will remain CEO of Sterling Industries for now, on a probationary basis. Your actions will be closely monitored by the board, which I now have the honor of advising." It was a total surrender. He was being left with his money but stripped of his power, his homes, his family, and his pride. He was a king, reduced to a figurehead in his own kingdom. Defeated Arthur signed the papers. His hand trembled as he pushed the document back across the table. He stood up, a broken man, and walked out of the room without another word. 3 weeks later, Leo Charles Lacroix was born. He had Genevieve's eyes and a peaceful disposition. Genevieve, now formally using her maiden name, again moved back into the Fifth Avenue penthouse. The nursery had been completely redone. The murals were gone, replaced with a serene, hand-painted landscape of the French countryside near her family's ancestral home. The air smelled of clean linen and baby powder. The desecration had been erased, replaced by a new beginning. She did not seek a new relationship. Her focus was singular, her son and her empire. She took an active role as chairwoman of the board, her sharp mind and quiet strength proving far more effective than Arthur's blustering charm had ever been. She was respected, feared, and ultimately triumphant. One evening, holding a sleeping Leo in her arms, she stood by the vast windows of the penthouse, looking down at the glittering expanse of Central Park. She was not the same woman who had lived here just a few months ago. That woman was gone, burned away in the fire of betrayal. The woman who remained was stronger, forged in steel, the true heir to her grandmother's legacy. She had faced the ultimate storm, and had not just survived. She had learned to command the wind. Genevieve Lacroix's story is a powerful reminder that the deepest betrayals can often forge the strongest resolve. She didn't just get mad, and she didn't just get even. She rewrote the entire game, transforming her pain into power and securing not just her own future, but the legacy of her child. She walked in on a nightmare and walked out with an empire. Hers is a testament to the fact that true strength isn't about never falling. It's about how you rise, and in the world of the elite, sometimes rising means taking everything, If Genevieve's story of strength and retribution resonated with you, please hit that like button and share it with someone who appreciates a story of ultimate victory. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more tales of drama, intrigue, and justice. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. What would you have done in her position? Until next time.